Welcome everyone to the ANA eLearning Academy. Today we have a presentation entitled The Dutch Sieges of the 16th and 17th Centuries by Lawrence Korchnak. If you have any questions during this presentation, you will be muted, so please put it into the chat or the Q&A. And without further ado, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First, I want to welcome everyone who's taking time out of their day to listen to this particular presentation. Should know a little bit of the background of it. This is essentially the body of the article that I wrote for the ANA in December of 1990, and entitled Dutch Sieges of the 16th and 17th Centuries. And the reason why I wanted to do it again is since then, since I've done research and putting out a catalog on siege coins, some of the information in there should be changed. So I don't know that I'll tell you precisely what it is, but it'll be the corrected versions will be in the text. And I was inspired by this by Moritz Wurmser, who had written an article on German sieges of the 16th and 17th century. And when I got involved in the whole concept of collecting siege coins, that was one of the first articles that I read. So I decided to just, if you will, copy his format and just talk a little bit about the sieges of the Dutches in the 16th and 17th century. And as you probably know historically, if you're here listening, Low Countries, and that's the Benelux countries. And see if I can't get that moving. The Benelux countries were in a struggle for independence during this period of time from Spain. Spain was the most powerful nation on earth, and they wanted to be liberated. There were a number of reasons for it, and that's the reason for me doing this particular bit on the Dutch sieges. There were probably more than 20 instances, at least 20. This is a map that'll be in the appendix of my book, The Obsidian Coins of the World, listing just those of the Netherlands. Of course, there are other maps that'll be for other sieges, but that's not what this talks about. So I had a number of sieges, and the sieges came because the liberation of the Dutch, the Low Countries, from Spain took a number of years. In fact, it was an 80 years war. And the causes for those wars, you talk about this, they made coins, they had to make siege coins, you're probably aware of that, in many denominations, in many shapes, and many sizes. I'm going to use some of the coins as I talk about the sieges. I use the coins from my collection. I've taken photos from them, so I hope they're good enough for you, and I don't want to fill out too darn much of it, but I think it'll give you a good idea of what's going on. Background of the thing is that there are really three main themes that run through the sieges of the 16th century and 17th century in the Dutch Republic as it was forming, and that was the political ramifications. Of course, there are always political ramifications, religious underpinnings, and in this case, very strong religious underpinnings, and of course, economic. And those things always seem to be swirling about when these type of confrontations of power occur. Politically, the most significant thing that came in the event was when Charles V transferred the sovereignty of the Low Countries to his son, Philip II. Low Countries was, of course, a loosely associated cluster of provinces. Philip II really mishandled his responsibility through bungled diplomatic actions. He wasn't as astute as Charles V. Unlike his father, he had no basic understanding of the people in the Netherlands. Charles V spoke the language, Philip didn't. Charles V was raised in Brussels. Philip was considered a foreigner. And from the outset, the situation was really less than ideal. Looking basically at the religious component, despite the fact that the Dutch people were overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, the religious element was really a decisive factor in the hostilities, Spain being a very predominantly Catholic country, even to this day. The Dutch theological basis was in the liberal tradition of the Dutch theologian and humanist Erasmus versus the very, very conservative line of the Spanish church. And during the early part of the 16th century, Protestant religion, especially Calvinism, thrived in a mercantile atmosphere. And you talk about a mercantile atmosphere. You had sieges that started out all of this time, but the mercantile atmosphere came under here, Philip II, and this being Bruges in the Netherlands. Picture I took when we were there last, and that's the Church of St. Mary's in Bruges. And the reason why I say that is it had a very positive mercantile atmosphere. This church has the only work by Michelangelo that was outside of Italy. It was bought in 1504 by a pair of Dutch mercantile merchants, Mouscrons, I believe, and it's rather impressive that a small, well, at this time it appeared to be a small city, was so vastly wealthy and so influential at the time. If you want to know about this particular Madonna and Child that's in the church, if you've seen the movie Monuments Men, it's mentioned and shown in that as well. But this is the atmosphere, the mercantile and atmosphere, and then again now you have this is the main square for Bruges. If you can see back, I'm going to see my cursor. You can see the spire of the Church of St. Mary's in the background. But this is essentially what Bruges looked like then, and essentially look what Bruges looks like today. You also have Antwerp. There's a fantastic number of cities there that had all kind of success in economic travel to everything. And so you've had these fantastic medieval style buildings that exist today. So businessmen like the role of the laity in the Calvinist church as opposed to the more monolithic Catholic church. And so the types of mercantilism that developed back in there were really, really welcomed by the Dutch. Even though the Catholic Church was respected as an important social, moral, and political force, the merchants really welcomed this new religion. Religion, always a part of it too. Now, this is the time of the notorious Inquisition. Under the reign of Charles V, the Low Countries experienced a papal form of the Inquisition. There were actually two forms. We see a lot of more likely the Spanish form when we see movies or we read anything about it. But the papal form is very much like the Catholic Church today. There are very strict and very moralistic rules, but not always followed up by the hammer if you didn't follow them. So they were kind of there, rarely enforced at that time. And on the other hand, the Spanish form of the Inquisition was extremely, extremely severe. And what happened in the Dutch Republic at that time, or not, they weren't the Dutch Republic, excuse me, the Low Countries, there was an incident at Rotterdam where one of the Protestants, there was a Protestant uprising of sorts. And if I'm not mistaken, in my history, reading Motley's Rise of the Dutch Republic, that someone had attacked a Catholic group of people who were also protesting and essentially cut out his heart and took a bite from it. And those type of heinous things occurred at this time. And when that happened, Philip just decided to impose the Spanish form of Inquisition. And needless to say, that did not pretty much make the Dutch like the Spanish anymore. During this period, too, taxes were imposed on the business people. Now you know that you have a thriving economy, and as Spain was getting involved with their superior positions in the world, they were imposing taxes. A taxation without representation. The taxation was unilateral. It was levied by, of course, a political entity, a foreign entity, and all the benefits that were derived from the money went back to Spain because Spain was building an empire, and the Netherlands, they paid dearly for it. The chronology of this, let me see if I can't get this to you. In 1559, Philip appointed his half-sister, Margaret of Parma, pictured here, as a governess. Now, she held very little power since her authority was really carefully limited by advisors that were designated by Philip II. And this arrangement gave Spain a means of preserving really absolute control over the Low Countries, and it was an excellent vehicle to promote the spread of the Inquisition. Hardly a day passed at this point without some type of execution. The situation in the area was very dire. When Philip stated he'd rather sacrifice 100 lives than change his policy, even the Catholics then began to join the Protestant opposition. And Margaret interceded, but Philip resisted very strongly. But unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, his resistance softened on May 6, 1566. He softened his stance. And during that lull, Protestants really were allowed to worship openly. However, after 3 months, he went back on his word. And in response, Protestants and the Catholics proceeded to rebel. The Protestants destroyed 30 churches and monasteries. And this caused William the Silent here, that would be William of Nassau, the Prince of Orange, to gain support. He started revolution. He tried to get support among the Dutch and wanted to secure the Netherlands' independence from Spain. During this year of 1567, we had the first siege, at least thought to be the first in that sequence of sieges, and this was at Valenciennes in 1567. That's a 15-soul peace. The townspeople refused to welcome the Spanish garrison, and they followed up with a siege. This particular peace is believed to be, and I'm not sure even in research that this particular peace was struck during the siege or subsequent to the siege, but it is listed in all the major reference works as essentially the first siege coin of the liberation, the 80 Years' War, the Dutch rise of the Dutch Republic. But Philip, and even with the siege, Philip became dissatisfied with Margaret, and he seized every opportunity he could to relieve her. And his choice of replacement really was crucial. Instead of picking somebody who knew diplomacy and who could maybe mitigate some of the rancor that is fomented, he selected Philip selected the Duke of Alva, who is one of his most skilled generals, and he did it to crush the malcontents. He was trained in military discipline, and his objective was to crush the rebels without mercy, because as a military man of that particular period, maybe even in today's time, who knows, every concession strengthens the opposition. So he saw anything that given up to the Dutch would be a sign of weakness, and that's when the period of the heaviest combat began. I put this on here because these are soldiers, and I know they're simply Spanish soldiers, but if you notice, they're all different kinds. I put that for a particular reason, because all soldiers at this time were mercenaries. You might have a Spanish garrison, Spanish soldiers, as you can see here, with armor, next to a group of Hungarians, next to a group of Landsknecht Germans, next to Scottish, next to English, whoever they could hire to fight for them, they hired, in those armies they put together. And this is essentially what happened here. Alva handpicked an army of about 10,000 men. He issued them the finest armor, and he attended to their basic needs by hiring 2,000 prostitutes, all properly enrolled and assigned. He installed himself as governor general, and he created the Council of Troubles, which terrified the Protestants, and they renamed it the Council of Blood, because although there were 7 members, 7 Dutch members, and then 2 Spanish members, the Dutch members didn't have a vote. Only the Spanish members did. And the right, of course, of the final decision fell upon Alva. So it was Alva who had the final say of everything, and the situation was not good. Alva arranged for money to be sent from Spain, and Spain, the money didn't make it. There were privateers who were beginning to establish England as a viable power on the seas, and they were attacking the Spanish vessels. As I said, Spain was trying to maintain its power in the world stage, and England was now rising under Queen Elizabeth. Queen sent her apologies, of course, that is politically expedient, but underlying it all, she was glad to see all the trouble and all the pirates taking the money away from the Spanish. Alva responded by imposing a new series of taxes. So if you can't get your money from the mother country, you try to bleed the small country again from what it had. Now, this was Alva's downfall. Catholics really opposed him at this particular time. He eroded the foundation upon which the Dutch economy was built. What followed was a series of mutual confiscations of properties as England and Spain played cat and mouse for quite a period of time. A new force appeared at this particular time, and this came to oppose Spain. This is the, I believe, Guillaume de la Marck. He was the head of what they called the beggars. That was a term that one of Margaret of Parma's courtiers or whatever used for those that were fighting against the Spanish, les gueux in French, gueusen in Dutch, but they were beggars, and these people really relished that title. And this gentleman was the head of the beggars of the sea. They had the wild beggars who fought in land and took whatever they could, and they had a group of people called the beggars of the sea, and they were essentially pirates. When they pirates, it's not the swashbuckling Errol Flynn type of piracy. They had the small ships that they would run around and they would they would take whatever they could take from the ships. Spanish, notably, because eventually the beggars decided to align with the Dutch rebels rather than the Spanish. To avenge the beggar atrocities, Alva sent his son, Don Federigo, and his troops indiscriminately ransacked homes, monasteries, churches, stole jewels, stole the costly robes and all the valuable things of the clergy. And there was no distinction made between Catholic and Protestant. They were just looting indiscriminately. His army crushed the weak defenses of Zutphen, it's a small town in Gelderland, and put nearly every man to death, hanging some by the feet and drowning over 500. This is a taking of Zutphen and the fighting. It's one of the things about sieges, it brought out not only the most sublime in some people in terms of bravery, courage, and giving, but also some of the basest. And war, they talk about war as hell. War was hell when you had to fight this way. And a lot of these things, and one of the reasons that turned me to looking at some of the siege coins is my interest in history and my background in philosophy and how we treat one another. Any rate, that's was Zutphen, and he put them to death. Another town, Little Naarden, surrendered after a brief resistance, and they greeted the victorious soldiers with feasts. And of course, after the feasts, the soldiers ate and drank. They killed every person in the town. It was not good for many of them. Don Federigo then later attempted to besiege Alcamar. This is 32 stiver and a quarter dollar piece. These are lead uniface pieces from Alcamar. Their mayor was rather a brave individual, and Alcamar was very, very, very much besieged by the Spanish. Towards the end of the siege, the mayor his people were starving, and he exhorted his people to hold fast in the face of hunger. He stood before them and stuck his arm up and said, "If you have to eat, take my arm for food. We will not surrender." Alcmar did later win that particular battle, but it wasn't because of their valiant fighting. It was because William of Orange has considered and approved the breaking of the dikes. One of the more interesting things of the time is, of course, the Dutch are in Low Country, and the dikes were often controlled in this fashion to repel some of the besiegers of the cities. And in this case, it routed the Spaniards. And the defenders produced about 6,000 guilders worth of these coins, 1, 6, 13, and 36 stiver denominations. And again, as many sieges are, as if it were in a precious metal, they could spend it and it was worth something. But when it was in lead like this, it had symbolic value, not an intrinsic value. The symbolic value was, as you can see on this one, 32. That's a 3 backwards and the 2 backwards. It would be redeemed for 32 stivers in real money after the siege, only if you won. If you didn't win, you really didn't have much but a souvenir if you survived. It wasn't an easy time. But at any rate, characteristic of the pieces, the tower of the city of Alcamar and the denomination. When Don Federico came to Haarlem, you can see his army setting up, and that's the city of Haarlem just prior to the siege. A Calvinist center was known for its support of the rebels, and there was really a brutal battle. 4,000 troops defended the city here, and they said defended with such intensity, Don Federico thought he was going to withdraw, but his father, Philip II, said he would disown him if he did, and so he didn't stop the siege, and they began, they continued the barbarities. In an effort to relieve Haarlem, William the Silent, that we mentioned before, sent 3,000 men, but they were destroyed. They heard word of them arriving, and they intercepted them and destroyed the 3,000 men. And all the other efforts to save the city were futile. This siege lasted 7 months. City's inhabitants were reduced to eating woods and leather, anything, weeds, animals, whatever was around, and Haarlem surrendered July 11th, 1573. Most of the 1,600 surviving defenders were put to death. 400 leading citizens were put to death. Those who were spared were shown mercy only because they agreed to pay a fine of 250,000 guilders, a sizable sum at that time, even by today's standards. And this was considered the last and most costly victory. 30 to 40,000 people died in this particular siege, I believe, is my recollection. And they produced a number of coins, most notably looking like this. This is 32 and a 16 stiver. Again, the coinage done and these are silver. The coinage done at the time were a necessity, so they would cut out, of course, the pieces to whatever size they needed and weight, and they would counterstamp, or they would stamp the arms of the city. This is a hallmark of sorts. There are several others. There are 3 or 4 different ones for each of these denominations. You see 2 different ones on that, and of course the date. It's a very interesting silver coins of Haarlem. At this stage of the conflict between Spain and the Low Countries, they needed to raise funds, and Holland and Zeeland were the predominant provinces, and they raised funds by increasing the value of the coinage by 1/8. And they counterstamped either with the Shield of Zeeland or a Lion for Holland. This is a gold ducat that was counterstamped Lion of Holland, and that was worth 12.5% more. And that's how they did it. Instead of just basically debasing their coinage, they revalued it upwards. Now, a new governor of the Netherlands, Don Louis de Requesens, took jurisdiction from 1573 to 1576. He was surprised at the number and the spirit of the Dutch. They said when you had soldiers back then, you paid them. They were very basically mercenary. One of the things that I always like to talk about is in the siege of Constantinople in 1453, many of the finest soldiers and, of course, the gunsmiths and engravers went over to Mehmed II because they paid them. And Constantine XI was essentially broke. That's not the only time that stuff happened. In 1527, the siege of Rome and the ransacking of Rome was because soldiers needed paid, and so they went out and got it. And so that's what you do. You didn't have to pay the Dutch, though. And this was Don Louis de Requesens. And notice, he said, when people are fighting for their lives and their honors, you really don't have to pay them. And so they had a whole batch of rebels who were doing it, of course, for the right reasons, pretty much the way it happened in the U.S. in its efforts at breaking away from Great Britain and the foundation of our country. At any rate, he came in, Don Louis, and he said he wanted to abolish the tax and everything. And he tried, but Philip's, he didn't listen to him. And there was a considerable delay. And so that's when William decided to really kind of get the troops back together. Now, at this particular time, Middelburg, Leiden, and a number of other towns were put to siege. In Middelburg, 1572 to 74, that remained faithful to the King of Spain. It was besieged by the Dutch in 1572 and by William of Orange in 1573. It was during this second defense of the city, a blockade prevented the Spanish Navy from going into the town, and the fighting here was extremely fierce and prolonged to the point that townspeople were reduced to eating whatever they could digest: horses, dogs, cats, rats, and even leather. Coins were struck in gold, silver, copper, and leather. I have a gold, silver, and leather piece that is extremely rare because leather, they were eating the straps, the belts, they were eating saddles because it's organic material. And when you're starving, you eat whatever you can. But people at this stage of the siege would eat the coins. Not unlike in the Lichtenstein ghetto, the five mark piece was, there was a 5 mark piece of magnesium, and it was worth more to be burned in the wintertime for heat than it would be to spend for anything else. The siege of Leyden in 1573-74 produced some very fascinating things. This is something I think is interesting, and one of the things that I had wrong in the article, but I had it wrong because essentially every other previous reference work had it wrong. What was correct was done by a pair of professors, Dr. Paul and Dr. van der Veen, who did a study of the Leyden coins and the Leyden siege, and presented a paper at the University of Leiden in 2007. And they through investigating the documentation of the time that no one had really gone into, they figured it out. Most people thought that, of course, siege coins, a normal sequencing of creating siege coin is use precious metals first, and you reduce down into baser metals or down to paper. That was the common thought. But William of Orange had authorized Leyden to make paper coins prior to the siege as they were being surrounded. So they made the paper first, and these paper coins were made from cut hymnals, prayer books. This is a golden that is split, and you can see the writing on that, which is rather fascinating. But to let you know that it was that way, what happened is after the first siege, there was a double siege, as I mentioned earlier. You had a paper 5-stiver, and then they made silver ones subsequent to that. So there were actually silver ones made after the paper. Instead of the denominations of coinage devolving into a baser metal, it evolved into silver. And then again, there were some sieges, some siege coins that were done in paper subsequent to these particular issues. And those particular ones were clearly done after the siege, and may have even been after 1581, because one of them lists William of Orange as the governor, and he didn't become governor till after 1581. So they may very well have been struck as presentation pieces, but that was the sequence of them. And at this particular time, in many references, they often list the token, St. Catherine's Hospital token, as a siege coin. That was a coin that had been authorized by Charles V, and it was canceled. It was taken out of circulation before the siege, and then it was in circulation during the siege, but it was not a siege coin. Research showed that those coins just happened to be circulated during. So I think it's important to note that, because most people, or in the past, it was pretty much considered that the quarter stiver piece was a siege coin from St. Catherine's Hospital. They did have half stiver pieces, which they revalued downward to an 1/8 stiver later on in the sieges of Leiden. So a year later, Don Louis de Requesens died while besieging Xerxes. And these are Xerxes. These are two pieces, a tin 48 stiver and a silver one. And it's an interesting siege, and the coinage is interesting, and I consider a little bit, quite a bit rarer than some of the other ones. At any rate, when he died, these pieces were struck during the siege, and Philip's half-brother, Don Juan, was placed in charge of the Spanish troops. Feeling cheated, not being able to pillage the city, the soldiers mutinied and began a campaign of indiscriminate plunder and violence. And the Dutch partisans referred this as the Spanish Fury. If you read about that, it is subsequent to the siege of Xerxes and the plundering, the raping, and the murdering that occurred during that time. Now, William used this action to reinforce his arguments. He said, we need everyone to join the cause. So he created a Union of Brussels. It didn't really survive because even when people are supposed to be fighting against a common enemy, sometimes they have their difference. That dissension between them while they were trying to put together the Union of Brussels gave Spain the opportunity to send Alessandro Farnese with 20,000 well-trained troops into the Netherlands. And at this particular time, he besieged the city of Kampen. It's a 1578 42 stiver piece. In Daventry, 1578. You see these fairly common. Now, I can't say that siege coins are common, but there are some siege coins are more common than the other. They're scarcer, but this is one, the very affordable copper pieces. They had a half, a 1, 4, an 8, a 16, 24, and I believe a 40 stiver piece in the series. And those are the two they show a coin that circulated 1578 from Devonshire and the counterstamp of the eagle of the city to indicate it's during the siege. Interesting, you will find these without the counterstamp, and the question is, did they circulate as siege coins, or were these ones just the only ones? Still a lot of research to be done here. It's fascinating. Now, they also, at that particular time, besieged Brussels. And Brussels was besieged in 1580. Here's a 36 and an 18 stiver piece. You often see the 18 stiver, you see with the 7-9. There are varieties with 1-5, 15, and 79. I think if you see over here, there's 1580. So you can have an 80, you have a 79, or a 1579. And there also is a variety here in this 18 stiver when he has a helmet on or not. So if you're into collecting varieties, there's a rare one for all of you to have. That should be interesting. These the material came from churches, the statues, the candelabra. They took the plates and silverware of the aristocracy, the governors, the nobility. They melted them down, put them into sheets, cut them into squares, weighed them, and they stamped them. Now, Margaret of Parma was, Farnese was good. And he was the son of Margaret of Parma, who, of course, came to do this first, and then she was ousted because I guess she wasn't nasty enough. They put Alessandro Farnese. He was probably put there essentially just to fight the rebels and to do pretty much what the Duke of Alva did as well. And later he came in. Catholics formed a league for the provinces, and they formed the United Provinces, of course, which became the Netherlands today, and the remaining bottom provinces formed by the Spanish Netherlands, which was 19th century became Belgium. Now, sieges go on, and that's Brussels. Beautiful, still the cities. It shows the fantastic wealth and prestige that these cities had at this particular time. Mystricht. Farnese recaptured nearly all the southern provinces for Spain, and one of them was Mystricht. It was besieged on March 12, 1579, and to gain entrance into the city, Farnese's attackers excavated a really extensive network of tunnels beneath the walls, and the defenders dug them to meet them. They heard that they were digging. They could sense that they were digging. So they dug tunnels to meet the people who are going to come up and under and fight them. And some of the fiercest battles were fought in these underground passages. And there was very limited maneuvering spaces. There was just nothing there for them. Hundreds of attackers were scalded to death, suffocated when boiling water was poured into the tunnels, and they lit fires to fill the passages with smoke. And 500 of Farnese's men were killed when their own explosives that they were going to settle under the wall to try to blow a breach into it, that exploded prematurely and killed them. Fortunately for them, it took 4 months, but the procedures finally took over, got in, and they massacred 6,000 men, women, and children. And out of the population of 30,000 in Mystricht, only 400 people survived. This was a major disaster for the Protestant cause. And the Dutch really began to turn on William of Orange. And Philip put a price on his head. And since he did that, there were a number of assassination attempts. This is an engraving. He had 2 assassination attempts. This is one of the most notorious ones where he was shot. And this is also shown on a jeton. And most notable things, of course, here they are. The dog trying to save the flock there. And here he is, the assassin trying to shoot William on the right, and satirically, if you will, because they didn't have, I guess, you didn't have the internet, and again, no social media. These were the propaganda pieces. There's Philip, the Prince of Spain, goading the assassin to shoot William of Orange, 1584. Rather fascinating. He died penniless, William of Orange, in 1854. So, not 1854. Gosh, no. 1654. I hit the wrong key on the typewriter there. No. Spain had taken the upper hand. Beggar still controlled the sea. Queen of England began to aid the northern provinces, and they sent troops there in 1585. And in a couple of the sieges, there actually coins struck that time with the Earl of Leicester on it, because he had his troops and he fought on behalf of the Dutch rebels. While Philip wanted Farnese's efforts to finish, Spain spread itself too thin at this particular time, and the situation became too difficult to manage. And so they ended up going back in. Maurice of Nassau came in. He filled in after his uncle, and William the Silent, and they began to take some cities back. And he recaptured Deventer in 1672. And that's a 30 stiver piece. I picked this one out of my collection because a number of the ones I have in the collection, this coin does not have the words Daventria in Daventer in Latin. It just has the eagle and that. This was, as many siege coins were done, not many, but I guess a significant number, were engraved as mementos. And in the back, it has, of course, a script in Dutch, commemorating or for the person. I didn't translate this one. I should have, and I apologize for that. I will do it. So the next time I bring this coin out, I'll know what the heck it says on the back side. Any rate, 1592, Farnese died of wounds. Philip died in 1598, and the number of sieges subsided. And war of liberation continued, and Albert and Isabella, Austria, were given sovereign rights in the Netherlands, and they formed a truce in 1609 and gave the Dutch a brief respite from war. But when they died childless, and you had the Spanish succession, then you had Netherlands reverted back to Spain. Now, we had another batch of fighting, and this is not just the Spanish, the Dutch revolt. These are others. And this period never experienced the fury of any of the earlier sieges. The struggle for independence went on, clouded by the hostilities in the 30 Years' War. And the Rhenish city of Frankenthal, yep, I'm trying to figure, and I forgot to tell you, of course, Groningen. I mentioned Daventer and Groningen, but I had forgotten to put my Groningen thing up on sitting here looking and talking and trying to remember this for you. But that's a really rare piece of $1 from Groningen, 1577. In the 30 Years' War, you had Frankenthal in 1623. Three pieces from my collection there is a 4, a 2, and a 15 Batson piece. This was settled by Dutch Protestant refugees, and it was besieged in 1623. And the blockade was placed, struck several denominations of coin, because that's what they had to do to pay. And these attacks on these border towns were made considerably longer. You had your Frankenthal, and then later on you had Spinola, an Italian banker who pledged allegiance to Spain. And my guess would be, if he was an Italian banker and he led an army on behalf of Spain, he was trying to get back his investment. And so I guess that's where he was. And this led to, he came and he attacked Breda in 1625. You've seen a number of these pieces, a lot of the smaller, the 1, 2 stiver pieces. You have the 20, the 40, the 60 silver pieces from Breda in 1625. Soldiers were engaged in battle. They were paid with these silver coins and became necessary again until the garrison could do what it did. Now, the Spain made some progress suppressing the Dutch, but the Dutch then recovered. They were supported financially by France by this time, and the money was poured into ships, and Spain's control of the siege were broken by England. So that's what was going on, particularly at this time. Deeply involved in the 30 Years' War, Spain yielded pretty much everything to the Dutch so that it could be free to fight France. It had a bigger war there, didn't want to worry about the rebels. They wanted there was a large country vying for them for power. So the Treaty of Westphalia was signed in January 30, 1648, and it ended the War of Liberation. The Dutch finally won their independence at that time. Now, that was the most prolific period of sieges, production of siege coinage. But that wasn't all over. There was still turmoil throughout the remainder of the 16th and 17th century. And the 80 Years' War, not so as intense, but then you had other places that were besieged. Kampen in 1672. Groningen, this is a picture of Groningen, and I show the map that's in Hanno Weiler's book on Groningen, Münster, Kulm. But you see those particular coins. You have coins that were struck, the 50, the 25, the 12 and a half, and the 6 1/4. I have the 50 and the 12 and a half here. The stivers, several varieties. You have a variety here with a large stamp or a smaller stamp of the 50. The 12 and a half, 25, and the 6 1/4 were all the varieties aren't that noticeable. Maybe a few from the strikings, but not much more. And if you recall the map that I showed, they struck an entire series of medals, notable for Groningen. And let me see if I can go back. I don't know if I have to go beyond. That's a city. That's a coin. None of these were struck during the siege, although they're considered siege coins. All of the Groningen pieces were struck subsequent to the siege. And because they were struck subsequent to the siege, there was also a series of medals, various medals. This is just one of the types. All large ones, I would say 50. It's from 39 millimeter size to 50 or so, and they depicted the siege, and these are presented afterwards. One of the medals was done with the arms of the University of Groningen, because giving to all of the students in Groningen University to help fight in the siege that saved Groningen, and that's where it is now. Over the years, well, the books I mentioned earlier, that some of the stuff here is different than what many of the books had, especially Leiden, and the sequence of striking the paper versus the silver coins. My reliance on this, when I started, there are no books in English, so You had Mayet's book. Prosper Mayet was a Belgian, but his book on siege coins was in French. He had Brasse and Mansfeld in German. He had Duby in French, Traina in Italian, and that's a little tougher. Although my mother was born in Italy, I pick up a little of it. It's not as easy for me because I never spoke it at home. But these things, you had Van Gelder, Van Loon's set of books. So that led me essentially to want to write a catalog, taking all of those books and all the siege coins in each of those separate books, put them in one book, give them a singular numbering system, and cross-reference them to it. And as I'm winding this up, I have a link here. I hope it opens up and I could show you what I mean, and then I'll open it up to questions if you want. Yes, this is, we're just working on it. It's being published by CNG. And let me see if I can get to a page and show you what it is. Introduction. This is where it's basic. All right, we'll leave this page. The book will include things, a brief description of the siege and a listing of every siege coin. I don't know if you can see this close, but if you look under here, that particular one, the 8 livre, is Mayet. That's where it's listed in Mayet. That's Duby. If you go to a different one, you'll see Mayet over here, Brasse and Mansfeld, De May, Van Hout. And that's what I've done in the book, and you'll see any number of them. And this is how it would be, a very brief description, because I found myself collecting these, having to go and I have the books. Of course, you have to do that to collect them, but I thought it would be at least to leave something back where someone can use one single source. And if you want to find out where that coin was, you'll see the designation underneath. So where my book would have it is number 9, that would be that spot in all of those coins. And so that's what my project was, and that's how I got in. Still like doing this and collect my coins. So I will be quiet now. If there are any questions or anything, that I will leave it up to you, Logan. It's all yours.
All right. We got 2 questions. How about the acceptability of leather and paper coins in siege money outside of Benelux? Thanks.
Not siege, but there are leather and things like that outside. But in terms of siege, you have leather not geld, paper cloth not geld. This is about siege coins. I have also, hopefully, if you come next month, I have on siege currency, and siege currency comes in many forms, not just in paper, but they cut in cloth. So there are things in siege like that. But I would say right now, not a whole lot of siege coins in leather that survived. I think the Middelburg piece. I have a Cambrai piece of 1595. I haven't checked it, but these are paper or it is leather. And I just haven't had the chance to put it under a microscope to examine it. I got to pull it out at this particular point and check it. But not much out of it. But there are things, money outside of siege money, and in leather and in paper, of course. A lot of things like that, I would say. And sealskin, of course. The Russians that came over in Alaska in the middle part of the 1800s, the earlier part of the 1800s, I think, or latter part of the 1700s, had money, exchanged money on sealskin. Very, very rare. I'd love to have a piece of that, but I can never afford
it. And the next one, has there been dye study of, I'm going to butcher this and I apologize, Stuvers, Stuivers?
Stivers. Have there been dye studies? I know of none. I've not done the study of them. I don't collect stivers particularly, but my experience in looking for these, I've discovered innumerable resources in Dutch on an unbelievable number of topics. I would not be surprised if there were something on it. Now, in this book, is stivers that are siege and other denominations, souls, écus. I've listed varieties because there are varieties of all of those siege coins, but I haven't listed all of them because some are so specific. For example, in Antwerp in 1814, there are basically 32 basic varieties and something like 4 or 5 variations of each of those varieties of 5 and 10 pieces, 5 centime pieces. So, yeah, I would guess there are. I don't know any, so I plead ignorance.
Okay. This one is a little long, but I will go ahead and read it. Thank you very much for a fascinating paper. I can't read. I am giving a paper on the influence of Dutch siege coinage on the siege coinage of the British Civil Wars next week for the British Numismatic Society, and so was delighted to hear your paper. I was struck by how many of the Dutch issues were square or diagonal in shape. In Britain, this is only closely associated with the Newark siege coinage from 1645 to 46. Do you think this was just a matter of practicality, as easier to produce, or deliberate effort to distinguish siege coins from regular issues?
I believe that it's practicality because, let me show you this to see, maybe I could show that. Because siege coins, if they had time, they could make them in the shape. All right, so here we'll go back here. These are ones that were struck. These are siege coins. This is Antwerp. See, they had time to strike them. These are the Antwerp pieces of 1814, the 32 varieties, okay, and they were nice, okay. Then you go back and you have other ones like Berg op Zoom or Bommel, which had time to actually make coins that look like the large pieces of the time. They minted them, and they, because of necessity, had to make them in necessity condition. My short answer to that is, looking at the sieges, it was basically necessity when they came into those shapes. And if you look, and he's going to be doing his talk on the British siege pieces, you had the octagonal and the lozenge-shaped pieces in Pontefract. You had the just cut pieces of metal from Scarborough, and then you had round coins from Cork. You had the square odd pieces from the cities of refuge in Youghal and Kilkenny and Kinsale, but you also had rebel money, the large things. So yes, they made them this way, but when they came to the shapes, when you get the square shapes, there were clippies intentionally made, but during the sieges, they weren't trying to be pretty. They were trying to be practical. The soldiers needed money. If they didn't, they stopped fighting for you. And sometimes they walked out in certain sieges in Europe, in my studying. So that's my long answer and short answer.
Next question, how can we get your book?
How can you get my book? I wish I had it ready. Was hoping to have it ready for the Pittsburgh ANA last summer. With COVID, everything was put off. Right now, I'm still working with CNG. Everything's together. We have pretty much the proof ready. I'm ready to get the final proof so that it can be printed. And I was talked to the people at CNG, and they said they should be able to give me a date soon when it'll be out. I hope by the summer for the ANA or whatever. And I told them I hope it'll be at a reasonable price. I think people need to have a chance to buy a book without having to sell their firstborn male child.
As long as it's the male.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you.
What is the price range of these pieces of history?
And these pieces of history, you can buy a siege coin for as little as $45, $50, the more recent ones, to tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Tens of thousands. It's not in here, but the South African 1902 siege. The book that I have is 1453 to 1902 because I took the siege of Constantinople as the first siege that I deal with, and there were basically 50, 60 siege coins that they believe were there. At that particular siege, and then 1902 was the gold de Inpon of South Africa, and they're worth a lot of money. The Middelburg gold piece, I went to a coin show because I haven't looked these up in a long time, and I saw it up for auction, and they were in the multiple five figures.
Oh, wow.
So, yes, they can be very, very expensive. And I began collecting in 1972 when nobody knew siege coins, and I didn't, and I had to read foreign books to do so, and I thought that was fascinating, and I knew I could never complete it, so it would always be a lifetime project.
All right, next question. How common are these coins? Are they found outside the Dutch area? Did the invaders take them back to Spain, or are they found in Spain today?
I would say they're found everywhere. Yeah. The people that took them and maybe spent them, maybe melted them down, but they're found everywhere. I scour. My wife is sitting over on the side here reading and being nice and quiet and listening to me do this again, and she can attest to how I scour the internet and auction houses and in companies that have stock online to find them, and they're virtually everywhere, and even able to find some online in eBay. If show you, let me just to show you that. Yes, you can find them everywhere. I found I'm going to find the first thing in here and show you what I mean. Bingo, not our these two. Aachen. Now, it's still, in my mind, it's still up for grabs whether this is a siege coin, but my research indicates it. I found both of these on eBay.
Wow.
So you can find them, but as they say, knowledge is power. So you have to know what you're looking for, or sometimes it's just pure luck. But yeah, they're everywhere. They're in Spain. They're in the Netherlands. A lot of them you will see. In fact, if someone's in the U.S., one of the finest collections of Newark siege coins is in Newark, New Jersey. Someone had a fabulous collection and donated to the museum in Newark, but they're all over the world. Now you can't buy those. You go to the Amsterdam Museum, and they're there and there. But the dealers, some of the better dealers in Europe, you will find them always. I don't want to give them all a plug, but you know who they are. If you don't, they can email me and I'll tell you who I think are good dealers, reputable to get coins that are genuine. And that's what I decided to do here. You have a coin, you have the size, you have the weight that gives you a rough idea what it is, and a black and white picture as opposed to a colored picture. I think it's easier to see detail because some of these are very worn. You can see that. You can only so much detail they can describe. But they're there.
All right, last question. Are modern counterfeits common?
Unfortunately, yes. You'd be very careful when you buy some of these because they can be counterfeited rather easily. One of the talks I give at local shows or at the PAN, Pennsylvania Association of Numismatics Convention, what I do local talks is I have a talk called The Other Side of the Coin. And on siege coins, I don't show them here, but there's another side to that. That's a uniface issue. That's why you don't see the back. One of the first places you look to authenticate a uniface siege coin is the back, and it'll give you an idea how it was minted. And if it wasn't minted in a historically correct manner, it's probably not genuine. So I always look at the back of the coin. If it's something other than that, like this Alessandria siege, 1746 from Italy, well, I've got these from sources, so I use mine as the touchstone. So I look for dies, I look for die characteristics to authenticate a siege coin before I buy it. And that's very, very important because it's easy to make fakes of them. And understand that siege coins are rare, and it was popular back in the 1800s, and very many museums would make copies of them, and people would make copies. I wouldn't say counterfeiters, but people would make copies because people would want a copy of it, and they would make them because they could not afford a genuine one. So those are still floating around, and back then they didn't put the word copy on them, so you have to be careful. Notably, a lot of your British siege coins, I'm very wary about a lot of those because there were the magnificent museums in Great Britain and the UK, and they made copies for people you could pick up at the museum.
Oh, wow. All right, I think that's it for the questions. Thank you again, Larry. That was a very educational presentation as always. And
Okay,
thank you all for
Logan.
joining us. We hope
Thank
to see
you.
you on some more ANA webinars, and we will all see you guys soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.